But I think I want to piggyback on something Chad said. We talked about getting, I guess, entry into white spaces. This is King before this whole thing, this talk in modern day, as far as like our politics, the back and forth that we have about, say, for example, like critical race theory and these things. Famous scholar, you may have heard of him, James Lindsay, wrote the book Race Marxism. Before anyone was even talking about critical race theory, I mean, King was a proponent of critical race theory or race
James
Marxism.
Baldwin.
James Baldwin.
So it's been around for a while.
You go back to Du Bois, it goes back to Marcus
And they always
Garvey.
paraded them and made them the leaders of the black community.
Why do we need leaders?
They choose our leaders.
Yeah, and so
White liberals.
and so I brought up James Lindsay just as a point because when James Lindsay, for example, when he talks about understanding what Marxism is and where to spot it, he poses the question. He says that you have to always ask yourself, what is the thing that is being owned? Because race Marxists, just like Marx, when Marx talked about capital, he viewed capital as a certain type of property.
Right.
So when these folks talk about quote unquote whiteness today, whiteness exists as a kind of capital, as a kind of property. And seeing as how, if economics, if you want to look at it, I mean, for vulgar Marxism, we'll look at it from, like they say, orthodox Marxism, or what he wrote about, what he talked about, because Marx famously or infamously, depending on your perspective, he ignored race and sex and all these things, and he began to, latch all these other things on to Karl Marx's ideas and perspectives. They would say, well, your economic lot is determined by the color of your skin. And so therefore, if you're allowed to be amongst whites, if you're allowed to be in their spaces and allowed to be in their institutions, that gives you access to the kind of
gonna rub off
capital.
on you?
All of that was an absolute lie.
It's just going to rub off.
Because in laissez-faire economics, best service, best product, best price. You will get the money because most people are going to make sure their dollar can stretch because it's in their best interest. What did Adam Smith say in The Wealth of Nations? The economic works best and everybody goes out for their own best interest. And when you look at your dollar, you're going to say, am I getting the best service, best product, best price? If you can give it, most people do not care about your color. They're going to buy it. That's why when you went to Harlem, the cotton clubs, even when it comes down, and it's terrible to say this, but even when it comes down to the dope game, the junkies know where the best stuff is.
They know it. That good crack.
They know it.
That good crack.
And that's where their money's going to go.
I just want to say something real quick about, Vince earlier mentioned the northern students being bussed down, the college students being bussed down to the South.
Right, to agitate.
And I want to talk about that in conjunction with another thing that we were talking about earlier, namely the fact that the so-called leaders, the appointed leaders, were instilling grievance and bitterness into the minds of colored people. They're about the middle of the century. It's interesting that it worked better in the North than it did in the South.
Why do you think it did?
Well, in the South, first of all, I'm sure we'll get into this later, the South has long been caricatured by Northern propaganda. And when it comes to the Black boule or the Black bourgeoisie or the talented 10th types, the civil rights activists and ideologues, they have caricatured the Black Southern working man as being docile, as being slave-minded.
That is true. I'm from the North, so I can speak to that. That is true.
But like for me,
no shade.
I'm a Southern man. I'm born and raised in Texas. My dad is born and raised on a ranch in rural Arkansas.
Okay.
We go back to Arkansas for generations. My mom, their side comes from Oklahoma. Right. So we're in the South and going out into the West. Now, what's interesting is growing up, and my dad is one of 13 brothers and sisters, and he's among the youngest. They, in rural Arkansas, were going to school with white folks before forced integration, right? So even though in places like Arkansas, you had laws on the books, what you found by and large is that a lot of these, well, maybe not by and large, but what you found, at least in some circumstances, a lot of these laws weren't even being enforced.
Right.
As it pertains to commerce, as it pertains to schooling, so on and so forth. Because it wasn't a lot of this agitation and rabble rousing that people were succumbing to. The communists were making inroads as early as the 1920s. You can read about this in Robin Kelly's book, Hammer and Hoe.
I haven't.
This is a black man who calls himself a Marxist feminist.
That's
right?
so gay sound.
And he's what he's doing in this book is he's documenting communism specifically in the South, in places like Atlanta, Birmingham, and Montgomery, since before King was in diapers. So King would come and be a part of this kind of long-standing communist tradition that precedes him. People think that, well, we'll probably get into that later on, but what you find is that these people were oddballs because Southern colored people were getting along well with Southern white people.
Right.
And that kind of relationship, that kind of understanding and reconciliation was being exploited by the communist faction as to say that, look, to the extent that Negroes are getting along with whites, it's only because those Negroes are Uncle Toms, because they're docile, this, that, and the third. And so they didn't have a whole lot of volunteers, if you will, when it came to the protesting, when it came to marching. That's why they had to bring people in. Bring in these people up from the north.
That movie, The Great Debaters, with Denzel Washington?
Yes.
Do you remember?
A lot of
Washington was a communist in the movie.
Yes, there was a lot of anachronisms in that book.
And this was pre-World War II, wasn't it? Yeah, and it showed that he was trying to organize the sharecroppers.
He quotes the Willie Lynch letter.
Yeah, exactly.
In that film, which the Willie Lynch letter, I mean, is completely bogus.
Right, but he quotes it.
And it's like, people loved it.
But there's an argument that people are going to accuse you guys or us of you guys are just romanticizing life in the Jim Crow South. You're trying to imply as if there were no racial tensions down here and that black folks weren't being lynched and hunted down like dogs by the KKK.
We don't have any racial tensions now, so I guess we cured it. Didn't we? Right. No racial tensions in the 21st century.
Right. Well, my argument has always been that obviously there were racial tensions there, but what I've come to learn is that why is it that post-Reconstruction, when you had so many free black men and so many injured white men, how did you allow yourselves to be subjugated again by the Klan when you outnumbered them?
I'm sorry, April, but I'm going to have to actually push back against your premise.
Okay.
I don't concede to that.
What don't you concede to?
I don't concede to this notion. Like, I'm not romanticizing the South by any stretch of the imagination, but what they are saying the South was like is completely just off. It's just off. The white folks weren't checking for black folks like that. They weren't going around looking for a Negro to
just hunting them down every day, every night.
That they did put in their Southern constitutions that black people couldn't vote in the Democratic Party primaries.
I mean,
they were completely segregated.
If we're talking about politics and voting and the quest for power, like that's an animal in itself.
Right.
But when it comes to social life, it wasn't this thing where where colors were just constantly being oppressed by the white man.
But when it came,
that's the story.
But when it did come down to voting and to politics, the oppression would come, and black men wouldn't fight back. I'm not concerned about the oppression. I'm concerned about the cowardice.
That's what I was getting at. And
the fact is that if black men wanted to participate in the American experiment, it was going to take violence, the same way the founding fathers and everybody else did it. They, when it came down to saying, I want to be involved in the political structure, in the political process, they allowed themselves to be cowed. And for a generation, they allowed many of them to be cowed. And when it came down to voting, we can go through Reconstruction and talk about, when they, of course, they were lynching and killing, and this is where the Mississippi plan and the South Carolina plan came from. They said either buy them, intimidate them, or kill them. And there are many testimonies up in Washington, D.C. when Ulysses S. Grant, who's president, sent down, they did the Ku Klux Klan Act, and they sent the Union forces down here to protect black people because, number one, they wouldn't fight back. They had to send the Union Army down here because they wouldn't fight back. That was always my problem. And the problem with me, as I said again, people do not oppress you because of the color of your skin. They oppress you because you're weak. And if you're strong, either individually strong or collectively strong, they don't bother you. They complained about the situation, but the men were not man enough to deal with the situation. So in the election of 1876, when Hayes went against Tilden, Rutherford B. Hayes was a Union general in the Civil War. He got shot 5 times. He was the governor of Ohio. He has a Republican nomination. And South Carolina had 3 times more black men in it than white men. And somehow or another, 101% of the registered voters voted that year, and South Carolina went Democrat, with 3 times more black men in it than white men. Mississippi had 2 times more white men.
How does that math?
Than black men in it than white men, and they did the same thing. But they started the Mississippi plan and the South Carolina plan in like 1875. And it was a definite plan to repress the black vote through intimidation, through violence, or either through buying it. And black men allowed it to happen.
Well, here's the thing. I think there's more nuance to it than that. Because when you look at the Reconstruction era and you look at the carpetbaggers and the scallywags, and how, I mean, you read about
you may need to define these 2 groups, the carpetbaggers and the scallywags. For the
I will, but let me continue my train of thought before I forget.
Sure.
What you have is, and I know what I'm about to say is controversial, but who cares?
That's what this show is.
You have carpetbaggers and scallywags basically encouraging vice within the Negro Southern community. Encouraging vice, encouraging things like bribery and just being, it was just a whole mess. And then by the time you get to the early 20th century and you see communist agitation, again, documented by Robin Kelly, not somebody who's ideologically on our side.
Right.
It's important, especially as a researcher, not to read other conservatives, but to read what they say what they are saying about themselves and about their own history.
Right.
And when you read people like Robin Kelly, and he's talking about how the communists in the South, as early as the late 1910s, early 1920s, are specifically pushing voting and pushing the kind of civil process or the civic
engagement
process, and making that a big issue, when you find that blacks were actually voting in those days in the South. Right. The poll tax was not exclusive to Negroes. The poll tax was utilized across the board when it came to voting, when it came to who's competent to vote, so on and so forth. But what the communists were doing was exploiting it, making it exclusively about race, and trying to really brew a lot of friction between Southern Negroes and Southern whites. And so while I take what you're saying, Vince, about the cowardice piece, I think, yes, depending on who we're talking about, that's a component. But also, we can't sleep on the fact that this issue was being exploited, exaggerated. It was being embellished to really make people so concerned about the issue that was really a non-issue. Make people so concerned about the issue that they feel inferior, that they feel oppressed and downtrodden and put upon, and so on and so forth. When the reality is,
voting wasn't a non-issue.
When the reality is, many white people weren't even voting in a lot of these Southern contexts. It wasn't just blacks who weren't, like, there were a lot of white folks who weren't even voting.
Correct.
So it's like, and so it wasn't. So for me, I refuse to continue, and I'm not saying you're doing this, Vince. Please don't hear me say this, but I refuse to give these leftist lunatics continual concession and continual ground and saying, like, yeah, well, black people were being oppressed and this and that and the third. Like, no, there was a lot that was going on that was purposefully and intentionally meant to brew friction. And it was done not by Southern rednecks, but by these people who were ideologically committed to communism and agitation.
No doubt. But to your point, the fact that black people were not being allowed to vote in a quasi-legal way because there were Southern constitutions that were racially exclusive. Black people are not going to be allowed to vote in these Southern Democratic primaries.
Break the tie.
That was a fact. They did in South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, and the Republican Party did not exist down South. They didn't allow it. If you were a Republican, they would kill you. They did not even ask the question. It did not exist down South till maybe the 1970s. So when people, even when this comes down to the big switch, actually, and they said that the party switched, I said it couldn't have switched because the Republican Party didn't exist down South. for a very, very long time. It was Democrat or nothing else. Every senator, every governor, every congressman from the South was Democrat because the party did not exist. So black people down South were voting. They had one option to vote, and that was a Democratic primary. And usually in the Democratic primaries, they weren't allowed to vote for a very, very long time because they were racially exclusive. So they had no political power. Now, before that time, in Reconstruction, there was a lot of violence. And it was a lot of racial violence because black people, of course, were trying to register to vote. They weren't allowing the old Southerners to vote. They felt, the old Southerners believed that, okay, we've been pardoned. We should have the right to vote. We should have our power back.
You're talking about former Confederates.
Yes.
Okay.
And you have the carpetbaggers and the scallywags that are, in their minds, these are illegal governments. Because a lot of these places down South were not really so much states anymore. They were.
And I believe they were illegal.
They were cut up militarily.
It was virtually martial law.
Yeah, it was martial law. They had the troops down there. And so you had a lot of the Confederates saying, hold it, wait. I thought that we were states again.
Yeah.
We thought we had our rights back.
Your government,
but
governments are no longer functioning. I'm sorry.
Right, exactly. And so then you had Ulysses Grant come in and say, no, this is over with. It was about political power. There's no doubt. And another civil war started happening down there. Mm-hmm. And it was against basically the Southern whites and the Republican Party that they believed was down there illegally taking over what they were doing.
So is your position that Black folks shouldn't even have been that concerned or involved in the political process, but rather ignoring what these agitators were saying and just focus on what Booker T. Washington was trying to get them to do?
And give it to Chuck, but not by the mechanisms by which they were being pushed and forced by these communistic factions.
Well, let me say this before and then Chuck can take it. But this is where I am with it. I don't care what was going on. If you're free, you make the decision about your life. Yeah. And you be willing to defend it with violence.
Well, real quick, do you believe everybody should have the right to vote?
No, of course not.
Okay, just curious.
No.
Can we qualify that?
Well,
because if you say I can't vote, I won't be offended. I'm just wondering.
You have a certain age to vote.
Right.
Of course.
Well, do you believe everybody?
At that time, women couldn't vote.
Do you believe everybody over the age of 18 should have the right to vote? Who's not incarcerated?
Should.
Over 18? That's too young.
Yeah, way too young.
Right now, it's just the Constitution is what the Constitution says. So I think
but that's not what the Constitution originally said.
No, not originally what it does now. It's just a law. It's a civil right. They can give the right to vote to anyone they want to give it to.
What should qualify a person the right to vote?
Basically, what the population says, what the majority of the people say, because it's not an unalienable right like the right to life, the right to freedom. I mean, the right to freedom. That's an unalienable right given to God. A civil right is a right given to government, and it can be made to be anything. And this is why the whole civil rights thing to me is a canard, because governments can give rights like right now. The right for men to marry men.
So much I can't remember.
Is a civil right. It can be also taken away. But my unalienable right cannot be taken away. Even our Declaration of Independence says if you try to take it, I have a right to resist with violence.
Yeah.
So when you start talking about the right to vote, it's a civil right. And the government and the majority of the people determine that right, like they did with the 19th Amendment when they gave women the right to vote. Women could not vote. The 13th Amendment when they gave the 15th Amendment when they gave it to men, all men, black men. Before then, they didn't have it. They can also expand it to 15-year-olds if they want to with a constitutional amendment. So it's a civil right. The people vote on it through the constitutional amendment process. And based upon how the people see it.
Well, there's a dilemma in what you're explaining here insofar that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, because you just qualified your position by saying if this is what the people want. Yeah. And when you look at the circumstances under which those amendments were passed, it was not through the people coming together and figuring this out. It was through nefarious. It was through strongholding.
It's politics.
Yeah, but
it was politics. It's what politics always is. It's land handling. It's swapping. But it was political.
But it wasn't.
Let me let Chuck jump.
It was far deeper than that, though.
But it was also something where Abraham Lincoln basically said, "We fought this war. 600,000 men have died. Mm-hmm. It is wrong for us to tell these black men who are now citizens who fought for their own freedom, you cannot vote in this country." And so now we have to pass an amendment to give them the right to vote. They fought for their freedom. And it's wrong to tell these people, as Andrea Scott, that you're not citizens. If you're citizens, you have a right to vote, as white men do. So how are you going to square that circle in the United States of America when you've had men that fought for their freedom, where you say that the Fifth Amendment to due process applies to everyone now, and then say, but you can't vote?
I can't see it that way. And
well, you were saying that it was all right for black men to not vote?
Well, I understand your position. I have to be more careful with it, because when you look at the quest for a proletarian revolution, a earlier phase into getting to that ultimate goal is mass enfranchisement. And so while the notion that, we should extend the right to vote to blacks and to, people who just came across the pond and are being a naturalized citizen and so on and so forth, to the extent that we do that, the politician who advocates for that, though he may seem friendly, like a friend instead of a foe, we have to really kind of look at what is the ultimate goal, what is the ultimate purpose of this. And so for me, it's like, I can take what you're saying at face value, but what I'm saying is that we should tread more carefully.
Well, it was a situation where you had to determine something here, whether or not after the 13th Amendment, where they were free, the 14th Amendment, where they had due process, then the 15th Amendment comes and says, okay, do they have the right to vote? Can these men who have fought for their freedom, and again, it basically just said that you will not be denied the right to vote based upon the color of your skin. That's what it said.
Yeah.
It didn't say every black man could vote. If what qualified, it said, but we cannot say you can't vote because you're black. You can't do that. Now, you can put other things in there, like poll taxes, like they did do.
Yeah.
Age, like they did do.
Which I recommend the poll tax.
Poll tax, age, certain things.
Yeah.
So states had other things, but they couldn't say,
have a state.
You cannot vote. And they could say you couldn't vote because you're a woman. They could say you couldn't vote because you're an immigrant, but they couldn't say color.
The very last question I'll ask you before Chuck, because I know Chuck is chopping at the bit, but do you believe that elections should be controlled federally or locally?
It should be controlled locally.
Okay.
Because federally it gets really, really weird, as you know. Yeah.
All right.
We'll see. That's the issue, and that that was the issue at hand at the time during Reconstruction, because the battle between the parties, North, South, was a question of, and it goes all the way back to the founding of the country, right? The perspective of the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, the position of Madison and Hamilton versus the position of Thomas Jefferson and Yates and others. The issue in the South was that the Republican Party agenda at the time during Reconstruction was to establish the federal government as being the superior of the two entities. We're talking federal versus versus the states. I mean, you guys you said so many things. But.